Grace and peace, church. If you have your Bibles, would you open them up to Acts chapter 27? I'll be reading from verses 21 through 44. And hopefully today we will be reminded, powerful reminder, that when trials come and the storm hits, God is in control. He has our backs through every wind, through every wave, through every uncertainty. We'll read that Paul's faith never wavered and neither should ours. Remember, we have an app on iOS and Android that you can download and find today's sermon notes and connect in the ways that Brickell has events and groups, as you heard Pastor Carter earlier. And this is the third time I get to preach this message today. I preached at Pinecrest as well, and so maybe the third time's the charm. Acts 27. Here we go. Luke writes, "Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, 'Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told, but we must run aground on some island.' And so when the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were nearing land, so they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further on they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' And the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. And day was about to dawn. Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from your head of any of you.' And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to them in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. And they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes and tied to the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. The word of the Lord. Now Paul is on his way to Rome under guard as a prisoner to stand trial before Caesar. And there's a Roman centurion. In earlier verses you read his name. His name is Julius, who is in charge of him and the other prisoners. Now, Paul is not in prison for doing anything wrong. Paul is in prison for preaching the gospel. Because sometimes when the reason that we go through hardships, the reason that we go through things isn't because of anything wrong that you did. And at the same time, the reason that you go through hardships and to go through things is precisely because you did everything right, and it's hard, and you don't always get the reason, and that's a hard space to be in. And so here you have Paul, who's on a ship that he believes he doesn't rightfully belong on, being accused of crimes that he didn't commit, being accused of things that he didn't do, and he warns them not to set sail, but they ignore his advice, and they set sail anyway. And if you've ever had the faith to tell somebody, this is going to happen, And at the same time, the frustration that says, this didn't have to happen. And at the same time, you're stuck trying to figure out why it happened. Maybe you can relate to this spiritual, sort of emotional paradox that Paul finds himself in. I mean, perhaps maybe you sense that God was providing a better opportunity for you. You even told friends. You even sang the song, good plans are coming. And then you get laid off of work. And you're wondering, this didn't have to happen this way. God, why did you let it happen this way? Maybe you believe that relationship was sent by an angel. You prayed about it. You believed in God for it. You felt peace about it. You even said to your friends, this is the one. But then it ended badly. It ended poorly. And now you're processing heartbreak and confusion, and you're wondering, God, why did you let me go in this deep if it was all going to fall apart anyway? Maybe you feel called to serve. You clearly got confirmation. You sought the fruit from your work. You saw the signs. You know the song, right? No? Different crowd. Right. Opened up your mind. But it turns into stress. It turns into exhaustion. It turns into betrayal. It turns to maybe spiritual abuse. And you think, well, this could have gone differently. And now you're wrestling with why it happened this way. Was this part of the calling? You may have been called to serve maybe your child or maybe a young person, and you did, and you served faithfully. You poured yourself in with love and with prayer and with guidance, and then they make a series of dumb decisions, destructive decisions that break your heart, and you find yourself saying, why did they have to choose this? This is not their path, and you grieve, and you're asking God, what did I miss? Could I have done something more? Is this just part of their journey? Can anybody relate to what Paul may be facing? And I love that Paul isn't too spiritual to tell people, I told you so. You ever have that friend, everything's falling apart, you call them up, and they're like, told you so, I told you this would happen, I told you not to set sail, you set sail anyway, and yet he still had the faith that they all would survive, and it's like that. Life, right? We know the destination. We know how the story ends. We know where we're going. But the detour, my God, did it have to be so costly? Did it have to hurt so much? We end up asking, did God allow this? Did other people mess this up? Did I mess this up? Was it all of the above? It's a hard space to be in, but it's a holy space to be in. Because it's in this space that we often grow. We grow, we learn to sit in that tension without rushing for easy answers. Well, how do we do that? How do we do that faithfully in a way that embodies gospel witness? I want to leave you tonight with 3 conceptual frameworks that maybe will help us do that. But before we do that, do me a favor. Turn to the person next to you, just look at them, and tell them it had to happen. It had to happen, right? Just want to wake you up. All right, come on. Here's the first one. Revelation over reason. Verse 23, Paul tells him, I heard from an angel. God's got our back. I got to stand before Caesar. Everyone is going to live. Everyone's going to survive. And so here's Paul. Imagine he's standing in the middle of the storm. And the reason he's in this situation is because of their decision. This was totally avoidable, but at the same time, inevitable. And you know what? I've come to a place in my life. I've come to the place where I'm learning, even now, that God will allow other people's dumb decisions to get me where I need to go. I've come to a place, I've seen enough play out in my life. We even read it in the Bible, right? People like Joseph. At the tail end of his life, he could look at his brothers and say, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Well, which one was it, Joseph? Was it evil or was it good? Which one was it? It was both. You're cheating. Not allowed to answer. Come on, man. God used and put to good use what was meant as an attack from evil, or in this case, the consequences of other people's dumb decisions. That's what Paul is saying. We didn't have to do this. This could have been avoidable, but if we stay stuck in the reason, of why this is happening. We're not going to be prepared for what God has next, because I'm going to tell you something. God reminded me that we're going to get through this, that God's purposes are still intact, even if the ship goes down. See, God didn't give Paul a bunch of explanations. He gave Paul something much more powerful. He gave him a revelation. He gives him a revelation because faith is not just about connecting the dots, and if I see the right things and I see the right patterns, then I know where I need to go. Faith is understanding that God in Jesus has reached into your life and has revealed something beyond the simple fact. I mean, people saw the resurrected Jesus in his day and they still doubted him. And God's like that, you know. He'll allow a situation, he'll create a situation. For example, Lazarus. Lazarus died. He let it happen. Now you got a situation where Jesus is not known only as healer, but as resurrection. And sometimes when you ask God for the reason, he'll bypass the reason to reveal that you're still his child. That God, why is this? I'm with you, I'm still here. I've got your back, you belong to me. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you, because if you operate by reason alone, and I know we need a reason for God, you Tim Keller fans. I know that. But if we operate by reason alone, then you'll be reactive to what already is important, useful, but limited. Limited to experience, limited to probabilities, limited to data, to information. But if you operate by revelation, you will be proactive to what will be. To what will be. You'll get a glimpse of God's sovereignty. Even if you don't have visible evidence, God's sovereign will override the circumstance. Paul's faith in God and his sovereign will gave everyone hope. Even before the skies cleared, this boat was getting battered day after day. Even before land appeared. And he gave what they were going through, their suffering, some context. He gave it some context because when reason asks, how are we going to live? How are we going to survive this? Revelation says, God is in this. God has our back. We're going to make it. I got to go to Rome. We're going to make it. We're going to survive. The boat, not so much, but we're going to live, right? Are we going to suffer loss? We're going to suffer a lot of loss. Cargo, gear, pride, plans, comfort. Throw that all overboard, but we're not going to lose what's most important, and that's our lives and God's purpose in it. And God's purpose will sometimes allow the loss of what we think we need in order to preserve what we're really called to do. Like, what if the storm you're facing is breaking down everything that's temporary in order to protect what's eternal? I wrote this question down this week. I was sermonizing. And I said, what if your ship wasn't meant to carry you all the way, but just far enough to reveal who God really is in your situation? What if it's like that? Like, faith will never know where it's being led, but faith will always love the one doing the leading. Any C.S. Lewis fans in the room? Yep, I got a great quote. C.S. Lewis. Here we go. He says this: hardships often prepare ordinary people, that's us, for extraordinary destiny. So Paul's destiny is Rome. That's where he's going, not just as a prisoner, but as a witness. And the shipwreck was part of that preparation. Which leads us to the second sort of conceptual framework that'll help us be faithful gospel witnesses in times of trouble: preparation over preservation. Verse 34, take some food for strength. Not a hair on your head is going to perish. Now, if you're like me, I can get somewhat cynical, and now you know something about me you didn't know, but I would have been on the ship and I would have been like, you said we're not going to die. What does it matter if I eat or I don't eat? You said we're not going to die, but then you said if we don't stay on the ship, we're all going to die. Which one is it, my man? Which one is it? And here we get a real-time scenario. This is really cool, where God's not only affirming his sovereign will, but he's also showing the way that he fulfills it. Through Paul, he's showing the way he fulfills his end. And again, it always it always includes our participation, human participation. And because God is not in the business of preserving our comfort, His way of fulfilling our ends will always include of preparing our character. The storm stripped away security, but it also shaped what was next. I got to stand before Caesar, not just survive a crisis. I got to stand before the emperor. And when God allows loss in your life, it's not to punish you. He's not there to punish you, but to prepare you for greater influence, for greater purpose, for greater faith. This storm is called a northeaster in earlier verses. I don't know what that means, but it probably means it was a nasty storm. It was a brutal storm. It broke and battered the boat, but despite the storm, despite the shipwreck, everyone survives just like Paul said they would. So he says, eat. Eat. Even though he knew God would keep them alive, he also knew they would need the strength required to survive. Eat. Eat. You need strength to swim, to press on, to make it, the next step. We often think that miracles or breakthroughs from God, they cancel the preparation that we need to do, but often miracles require it. Like you think Noah just waited for the boat to magically appear? He had to build it in faith. Gather animals, right? Store food, follow detailed instructions. And the miracle of preserving his family through the storm came, but it only came after long-term discipline, preparation. You would think that David killed Goliath in one shot, skilled in an instant, but really, it was all those years of hidden preparation, fighting tigers and lions and bears. And I mentioned Lazarus resurrecting. Even that required human participation. Mary and Martha had to get Jesus. Somebody had to roll a stone away. Somebody had to unwrap Lazarus in his grave clothes. And like what if this season you're surviving? What if it's meant to prepare you for something greater? And are we asking God for a breakthrough? Are we asking God for a miracle that we're not preparing for? See, miracles begin with the word from the Lord, the word from God, but they manifest as a faithful response. Right? So our preparation, and that could look like the smallest act of obedience. Our prep work is our vote of confidence in the miracle that we haven't even seen yet. Preservation is never the goal. Never. The goal is always preparation for mission, preparation for purpose, preparation for witness, preparation for movement. These men were about to hit the shore, and they had to rebuild, and they had to move forward. Any Sinclair Ferguson fans out here? Yeah, that's cheating too, Phil. No, but I love that. He has a great quote. Listen to what he says. He says, God's grace never negates our responsibility, but enables it. In other words, faith not only expects God to move, faith also gets ready for God to move, gets ready for it. And eating bread in a storm, it's just a simple, we all kind of gloss, they were eating bread. But listen, eating bread in the middle of a storm becomes an act of spiritual momentum, preparing for what survival would require. Here's the last framework I'll leave you with. Purpose over panic. Verse 42, the soldiers are plotting to murder everybody. They were afraid that they would escape. The centurion keeps them from carrying out that plan. Verse 44, they arrive safely on land. Paul and his crew were in absolute chaos. Their ship is falling apart, and so what's the natural response? You've seen a lot of those movies. Everybody's in pure panic mode. That's the natural response. What was Paul's response? Purpose. Purpose. He gives clear instructions. He's leading other people. He's staying calm because he's dependent on God's promise. And don't get me wrong, anxiety and insecurity and fear, that's all normal. It's biologically normal in times of trouble, in times of uncertainty. It's the way your body protects you. But if all those things are running unchecked, then uncertainty will destabilize you instead of strengthening you. Soldiers wanting to kill 200 plus people, that's panic running unchecked. But Paul knows that God's promises, they're not tied to the structures that we often put our trust in. He tells them, swim, float, backstroke, breaststroke, do whatever you got to do to get to shore. No one is dying today. And this is a beautiful reminder that even though ships may break and systems may fail and structures may fall apart, and even when we find ourselves in absolute chaos, we can know that all things are working for our good. We sang that just now, that God is working all things for our good because his promises never depend on the structure. They rest on his word, and his word made flesh. We read it in the gospel, says, destroy this temple and I'll raise it again in 3 days. We can look back and see that even though the cross looked like the ultimate shipwreck, actually it was the path of ultimate purpose. And so if you're here today and your ability to handle life is conditioned on things being easy and things being predictable and things being perfectly aligned with your comfort, then you don't have mental health. What you have is fragility, and fragility is not a flex. Fragility means that you're going to mistake challenge for danger. It means that you're going to mistake discomfort for threats and boundaries for personal growth. I have a daughter. She's an athlete. Amazing. I don't even know where she gets it from, but in moments where she's shutting down, in moments where she feels like quitting, I said, you can't quit now. You got to build that tolerance. That's what we call capacity. You got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And one day people are going to look at you and they're like, man, she makes it look easy. It's not easy. It's not easy. If you're here today and you think that the world around you has to accommodate your safe space, then what you have is not strength. What you have is dependence on the right conditions in order to avoid anything hard. Can I tell you a story of how I came to Crossbridge? Is that okay? It's a story about panic. In 2009, the church I was working for went through a chaotic split. Nasty split. I'll spare you the details as to why, but the Spanish service, they decide from one Sunday to the next to disappear. They start their own church. Good for them. And I remember the pastor calling me into his office because at the time I was a worship pastor. And now you know something else about me you didn't know. I was the worship pastor, and he says, Sam, I don't know how to tell you this, but we can't keep you on full time. A couple years prior, I was working for one of the most prestigious law firms in the world as a legal clerk. Downtown, 50th floor, Bayview window, comfortable. And now I got to get on stage and sing God of Wonders. You remember that song? Those are half of you don't even know that song. I got to go home and tell my wife 80% of my salary is gone. All my health benefits are gone. I got 2 kids. I got to sit in that tension. I still felt called to vocational ministry. I start putting out my resume. I get a call from a Pastor Felipe a week later, and in the interview, I was shut down. I was shut down because, sometimes the storm on the outside, they become the storm on the inside. So I was emotionally drained because that's what prolonged panic of keeping everything together does to a person. But despite of all of that, Pastor Felipe calls me a couple days later. He says, hey, I want to hire you. I want to hire you. And if you asked everybody in that room that day, they got a different perspective of what happened, and that's okay because we can only look at things through the lens of who we are. One elder, if you ask him, his name is Peter Thompson, maybe you know him. Pray for Peter, speaking about hardship, pray for him, lift him up in prayer. But if you ask him, tell him, why is Sam here? He'll tell you, it's because his wife. What she said about Sam was better than what Sam said about Sam. And that's how he handles his panic, right? He's got a discerning kind of listener, stacking information and facts, and right? My wife's just kind of shooting the gaps. Well, what my husband is trying to say, and I'm like, yeah, I can do that, sure. And that's how she handles her panic. Pastor Marcus, asking, doing his best HR impression, and I don't know if you know Marcus. He's like, pretty much nailed him. He's like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because, if you know Marcus, he's got to make sure everything's in perfect harmony, everybody's getting along, and that's how he handles his panic. But I'm so grateful that I've been here so much longer than 5 years. I've been able to sort of co-plant, Brickell, all of these changes that I see in this building. I'm just so grateful that, we have this space, and there was a hard space even before Carter. He'll tell you this place was a hard space to be in. I don't know if I ever told you, before we hired Carter, I look at Felipe and Marcus, I'm like, another white guy? We're going to hire another? Is that part of the confirmation? I guess so. Johnny Contini, also white. I mean, but I'm grateful for their Debbie Peterson, also white. I'm grateful for their leadership and their mentorship, right? I'm grateful that we can meet in this place. Pastor Carter, always preparing us for spiritual readiness for what's next, reminding us of our need of the gospel, as the gospel gives us unshakable purpose that outlasts any and every panic. Jesus didn't die and rise to make you comfortable. It's your public service announcement. He died and he rose to make you useful, especially when things are falling apart. And because he walked into the greatest storm of sin and death and came out the other side victorious, we can know that our storms, they don't have the final word. He does. Amen.